I'm not infallible. And that brings us to the stupidest thing I've ever done in an airplane. Hands down, it's the dumbest thing ever. I landed at the wrong airport. I've been thinking about this for a long time, and I think it's time to come clean and be honest with you. If you fly for long enough, you're going to make a mistake. You're going to do something you shouldn't have done. You're going to go someplace you shouldn't be. It just happens. And it's not something we plan on, and it's not something we're happy about, but it is almost unavoidable that being humans, we're going to do something that we're not proud of. I've done some dumb things in an airplane. Over the last 35 years, I've really kind of learned some things firsthand that I wish I had learned from listening to somebody else. So, in the interest of making your life just slightly easier than mine has been, let me share with you a couple things I've done that were just flat out stupid, but that I learned from. And I'll tell you how I dealt with it and how you can avoid it in the future. And embrace yourself, because the second story I'm going to tell you is by far the dumbest thing I've ever done in an airplane. Entirely my fault. There's no way to pretend anything else. And at the time, it was profoundly embarrassing. Now, the first one, and a relatively common problem, I busted Class Bravo airspace. Totally unintentionally. I was flying out of Tampa Executive Airport over to my home field, Winter Haven Regional Airport. It's only about a 31-mile flight, and I had flown over that morning at 1,000 feet because it was a beautiful, clear morning. But by the time I departed to come home, a scuddy layer of clouds had formed. Not really bad. It was a scattered layer, but I didn't want a scud run under it. I don't want to be flying around at 700 feet. It's just not a great idea. And of course, being Florida, we get some vertical development to the clouds. So I couldn't just go to like 1,500. I had to get a little higher than that. So I'm coming out of Tampa Executive, and since it's only a 31-mile flight, I'm not using VFR flight following, which I normally would for a longer flight. And I'm not talking to anybody because Tampa Exec is a non-towered field and my field is a non-towered field. So no big deal. I don't have to talk to anybody. I'm going to be taking off in Gulf airspace, climbing up into Echo airspace. Not really. And then I just descend back down into Gulf at my destination. Well, here's the challenge. As I get in the air and I realize I really don't want to scud run under this scattered layer because it does extend for quite a while, I climb up through a hole, no problem, plenty of cloud clearance, and I just keep climbing up because those clouds go up to about 2,000 feet. I'll go to a VFR altitude, I'll go to 3,500 feet. The problem was Echo ended at 3,000. I went into Class Bravo, that 500 feet extra, and it's only for the last 2 or 3 miles I was in the Bravo, but I did bust the Bravo. I never would have known had I just kept it to myself, no big deal. But as I'm flying home, as this graphic shows, I'm flying right by Lakeland Linder Regional Airport, now Lakeland Linder International Airport. And just to be a nice guy, I tune into their frequency and just let them know I'm flying by. And their response to me is the thing none of us want to hear. I have a phone number for you when you're ready to copy. I was not a happy boy. I write down the phone number, I fly to Winter Haven, I land. I hope you're enjoying me tell this story about dumb things I've done, but as long as you're enjoying my personal misery, why not subscribe to the channel, click like on this video, and share a comment about the dumbest thing you've ever done if you're willing to share it. And now, back to the episode of my personal embarrassment. And I call my boss because I'm in a company airplane. I'm not just out on a recreational flight. I was actually doing business. I have to call the vice president of ops and say, hey, I just busted Class Bravo airspace. How do you want me to handle it? And to his credit, great guy, he said, call the number, do a mea culpa, just accept responsibility, and off we go. And then he added the thing that I knew I was going to do anyway, because I've done it in the past, file a NASA report. That's part of the aviation safety reporting system. You can get the form online and submit it. This is a great way to cover your butt when you've done something dumb. Not malicious, not intentional, but just like this situation where I inadvertently busted Bravo airspace, I can tell on myself. Because if the FAA can gather information, and in this case, it really is NASA gathering the information of why we make common mistakes or how we ran afoul of the regulations, they have better information to work with, making the airspace system safer. So I did call the tower and I did do a mea culpa, and the tower controller was absolutely great. And he said, I'm not going to escalate this at all. I explained what happened and I kind of forgot where I was for a second. But just because they are not going to escalate it doesn't mean somebody farther up the chain won't have that desire. So I filled that aviation safety reporting system. I've never gotten any pushback on it. And I've never minded telling people I did that very stupid thing just because I really wasn't paying attention to exactly where I was, because I got a little lazy thinking it's a short flight. I just flew over this morning. I know what I'm doing. I'm going from golf to echo to golf, except I wasn't. I was going from golf to echo to Bravo to golf, and you need to talk to somebody when you're going into Bravo. And that brings us to the stupidest thing I've ever done in an airplane, hands down. It's the dumbest thing ever. I landed at the wrong airport. I really did. And it is not a happy feeling. Let me tell you how this came to be. I was flying out of Central Connecticut, out of Meriden Markham Airport. Great place. I had a terrific time there. Single runway, 1836. Terrific people I flew with. And I had some really interesting students and clients. One of them being this guy who had a private pilot certificate but hadn't flown in over a decade. So I was bringing him up to speed so he could get current again. Essentially what we would call today the Rusty Pilot Program, but back then that didn't exist. Well, one day we had scheduled a fairly large block of time so we could do cross-country flying, because that's something he really wanted to do. His choice was to go from our home field, Meriden Markham in Central Connecticut, out to Mansfield Municipal in Massachusetts, out just south of Boston, up to Nashua, New Hampshire, and then back to Meriden Markham. Perfectly fine flight. The problem was he showed up with the entire flight planned on 3x5 index cards, and all he had was VOR radials and distances. No headings, no plot. He didn't have a traditional cross-country log filled out. And I did tell him, this isn't good preparation. You're going to have problems with this. We should reschedule for a flight and we should just plan it out for real. And then you can plug in the weather information on the day when we go. And nope, I can do this. I know this will work. This is going to be fine. I tried to talk him out of it for quite a while and instill in him the importance of being well prepared for a flight, especially for a flight that's going to be 250, 300 miles, whatever this was. And we were going into places that he was not familiar with. He had not flown in these areas before. But he insisted. And in my naivete, I thought, you know what? He's insistent. I'm going to let him go ahead and dig a hole. I'll go along on this flight and I'll let him get all confused, and he'll see that he really does need to plan more specifically for the flight. Just having a VOR radial and a distance isn't good enough. Well, what I missed on this is I had never flown through that area either. I'd done most of my flight training in Florida. And even though I was based in Central Connecticut and had flown up into Massachusetts and out to New York, I hadn't flown this route. And I hadn't been over by Boston before. So everything about this, once I got about 25, 30 miles east of my home field, this was all going to be new territory to me too. That had not occurred to me. So we launch off, we set out for Mansfield, and about halfway there, it becomes apparent my client is really confused. He's becoming very flustered, and I have to help him find the destination, stay on course, and frankly, I had to help him land the airplane because he really was becoming so distracted he wasn't able to fly well. While we're on the ground, I tried to convince him, this is what I was warning you about. We should go home and we should plan out this flight for real. We don't want this to get worse. And my client said, no, I know what I did wrong. I've got it now. We're good. We can go to Nashua. Fairly simple, relatively northerly course. We can do this. We can use VFR flight following from Boston Center. It's going to be great. And where I should have put my foot down and say, no, we're going back home. We're not prepared for this. I again thought, okay, I'll let him dig the hole. I'll let him go ahead and be on this leg, and I'll be essentially there to make sure nothing untoward happens. Let's go see how he handles it when he gets behind the airplane again. And sure enough, We weren't 20 miles out when he was totally discombobulated. He had lost the ability to fly the airplane. He was so distracted and confused by why nothing was working out for him. And remember, he had radials and distances. He had no landmarks. He didn't know where he was. I was handling the radio work with Boston Center. So finally, I had to take the airplane from him. And I was kind of lecturing him in the airplane about this is exactly what I was warning about. And he finally understood. He's not prepared for this flight. He assumed I was, but I was not, as this story will show. Not too many minutes later, we're flying along, and we had shifted our course to the west to stay out of the heavy, dense traffic of Boston. This is before it was Class Bravo. Back then, it was TERSA, I think, Terminal Radar Service Area. But in any case, it was still a very busy airport. We shifted our course west, and I was using the Nashua VOR to get us to our destination. We did not have DME in the airplane. GPS didn't exist yet. We're still using the VOR, the compass, the directional gyro. And I called Boston Center and I let them know my destination is in sight. I can cancel VFR flight flying. They let me go. I switch over to the tower frequency and call and say, I've got you in sight. I'm 10 miles out, blah, blah, blah. And they clear me for a straight in landing. Everything's great. They asked me to report 2 miles out. And I did report 2 miles out, and they came back with kind of a curious response. Cleared to land, we don't have you in sight. Well, it is a little hazy sometimes in New England, and it was entirely possible my landing light had burned out, so I wasn't too concerned about it. I went ahead and repeated that I was cleared to land on the runway, and they didn't have me in sight. And I come in and I land, and my client is completely out of it at this point. He's barely functional. Nice guy, but he was very overloaded and learned an important lesson from that. And as I roll out, I notice dozens of aircraft on this field, but they're all Army helicopters. And over to my right, as I'm rolling to a stop and coming up to the taxiway, I notice there's an old World War II style tower with a frequency painted on the side. And it is not the frequency that's in my radio. And I suddenly become aware there's a reason Nashua didn't have me in sight. So I switched to that frequency. I called and said, I'm the warrior that just landed on your runway. Apologies, I was going for Nashua and have come up short. And they called back as I asked them if I can taxi back to the starting point and depart for Nashua. They called back and said, is there a CFI on that aircraft? And I responded, yes, a very embarrassed one. They cleared me to taxi back, take off. We went to Nashua, got some fuel, and went home. I really learned a valuable lesson about that. First of all, I'm not infallible. I agreed to launch off on a flight of a couple hundred miles into unfamiliar territory where I hadn't planned the flight out either. And it just so happened that since I was using the Nashua VOR to navigate, the VOR radial we were following fell right on Moore Army Airfield, a helicopter base that is now closed and indicated as closed on the chart. But yes, I landed there once unintentionally when I had planned to land in Nashua, New Hampshire. It was very embarrassing. I did tell my boss when I got back home that I had screwed up. He got a chuckle out of it because he knew I was going to learn something out of that experience, and I did. And I did file an aviation safety reporting system form on that one, just as I did in Tampa 30 years later. Everything you do is a learning opportunity. It is absolutely possible for you to have a humbling experience and benefit from it, although it may not be an enjoyable process initially. Look, I've done some really interesting things with aircraft. I've been able to fly over half of the United States, 2,000 feet AGL in a little two-seat trainer, and I have absolutely loved it. It's been a phenomenal ride, but I'm also honest enough with myself to say I've made some really stupid mistakes. I've suffered from oversights. I've become overly confident at times. I've misjudged my capabilities, and I have done things that were probably dangerous. And I was lucky enough to come out the other side and learn from that lesson rather than suffering a more considerable fate. Look, you're going to have these challenges too. Humility is good for a pilot. It's also good to have the confidence to know I can control this aircraft, but planning is key. And I learned that from landing at the wrong airport with a client and go ahead and try and act like a puffed up, arrogant pilot after that. You just can't do it. Thanks so much for watching this episode. I hope you learned something from this, and I hope you will use your failings, your embarrassing situations, your bounced landings to learn something about your flying potential that might help you be better in the future. And if you share those stories with others with humility and grace, you may be able to help them become better pilots without suffering the same indignities we have. Thanks so much. I'll see you next time, right back here on Mad Props Aero.